Hello, and welcome to S Mortality Trends through the pandemic. This is continuing the series. In this episode, we're going to be looking at other physiological causes of death other than COVID, heart disease, and cancer. Uh, these are going to be ones that I had mentioned before that I had done historical trajectories from 1999 to 2022. I had a recent data update for May 2023, but because these are physiological causes of death, there's not going to be a huge amount of difference from prior slides or prior statistics that I had. So the first cause of death we're looking at in this group is stroke or cerebrovascular deaths. And again, we're getting the standard curve. And again, to orient everyone who may be new to this, the vertical scale for most of these physiological causes of death, and I will note the exception when it occurs, are going to be logarithmic. So instead of your normal linear scale where the distance between each of these horizontal lines is equal, it goes from 0 to 1 to 10 to 100, 1,000, 10,000, and the rates are per 100,000 people per year for the rates. So that might be a little different from what you're used to looking at graphs. The reason I do this is because for physiological causes of death, you get this traditional trajectory for, I should say, adults or old people, where it's almost linear. It's kind of a frailty law that as you get older, you kind of exponentially are more likely to die due to natural causes of death. So there's not much to say about this, though it does look like something funky is going on with the younger adults here. So for each cause of death, there will be this kind of graph where we see, the curve. But what we really want to investigate is how it changed in comparison to 2019, and we'll be looking at the pandemic years. So here we go. Now, for these other physiological causes of death, or physiological causes of death in general, because the rates of death for children tend to be very small, you'll notice on the horizontal axis here, I start, and it will differ based on those causes of death, where the rates start. I start here, and it's a matter of judgment. I start here at age 30. And the reason why is sometimes it's just too few deaths, or there's just too noisy at young ages because it's such a low rate. And if you get into the CDC data, they'll give you confidence ranges for the rates of death. And, I don't want to really do an analysis when you're doing it based off of over a nation where the whole nation is, over 330 million people, and then you're getting into an age group and you only have a few hundred deaths for that particular cause, if that, maybe it's a few dozen deaths. And then you're looking at, oh, it's a huge percentage difference. Yeah, you're going from, say, 5 deaths to 10 deaths. Oh, it doubled. Um, yeah, that's not really a good statistical analysis. I, don't want to go there. So I try to cut it off at an age where it's really starting to be a meaningful cause of death, where I can look at some meaningful statistical, increases. And we really are seeing some of this, especially in the really bad pandemic year, which was 2021. So that's red. And I did pick these colors on purpose, that the dark blue, 2020, that's our initial year. Red was the really, really bad year for pandemic deaths. And then we have this lighter blue for 2022 coming down. Okay, yeah, I kind of picked these on purpose. But we're seeing that stroke deaths, it was worst in the statistics we currently have for age 35 to 39, relatively an increasing. Remember, it's a higher rate for older people, and we may be seeing, and this is what I really want to focus on because I'm concerned about where it will go in the future, is what's the trend going from 2020 to 2021 to 2022, and looking at this 40 to 44-year-olds, going over 15% increase. This is not that great compared to 2019. And then now I'm looking at these older people, and remember, they're at the highest rate compared to younger people, and we're seeing an increasing trend. I'm not liking this. Over age 65, increasing, increasing, increasing. I'm sorry, and I forget, the video is going to go the other way. Increasing, increasing, increasing. I really don't like that trend, especially the 85 plus, 80 to 84. Um, that's not good. Is it because they're not getting appropriate care? Is there something with regards to maybe long COVID? I don't know what is causing this. I'm just looking at this trend that this 15% increase over a period of 3 years is something that should be investigated. Could be caused by all sorts of things, of lack of care over the period, that perhaps stroke being associated with high blood pressure, things that are interfering with blood pressure being controlled, or other things going on. So these are the kinds of things I'm thinking about when I'm looking at, so this would be the meaningful graph, not necessarily the prior graph, which I can, barely see anything in. So I'm just like, I'm not liking the trend I'm seeing here. Chronic lower respiratory disease, and you might be going, well, think emphysema. So most of the time with emphysema, we're thinking of smoking related disease, but this does not have to be smoking related disease, but long-term problems with your lungs, long-term dying slowly kind of physiological disease. Again, you're seeing a very low rate at younger ages. So as you can imagine, I'm going to be starting the analysis of change at higher ages here. But it does look like there's quite a bit of change. I want you to notice our prior graph with regards to stroke went up to 10,000 in the vertical scale. Notice that the top level for our vertical scale here is 1,000. I do want to point these out with, we're trying to make comparisons between causes of death. Try to orient yourself when you're making these comparisons. So yes, I start this at a higher age. I start this at 45 to 49. But notice for chronic lower respiratory disease, everything went down. So why may this be? Well, maybe something else was killing these people off. Yeah, so this may be one of these cases where the people who would have died of chronic lower respiratory disease died of something else during these years. That's just a thought. Or something that would have been recorded as a chronic lower respiratory disease death got recorded as something else. That is a possibility here. It's substitution effect. Some people say, oh, pull forward effect. It could have been that something else got recorded, and it could have been COVID, it could have been something else. Okay, stroke, no. Those would have been, I think, presented differently. However, the other aspect is, let's look at the scale. Now, again, 45 to 49, 55 to 59. Let's look at what the death rates were. I'm going to go back a slide. Okay. So these death rates are actually not terribly high. This is below 10 per 100,000 per year. That it's decreased by 10% is really not moving the needle a lot on these death rates. There's not a lot of people dying at that age. You had to have been a really heavy smoker or have a genetic problem. It could have been asthma or something like that that killed you at such a young age due to chronic lower respiratory disease. You probably had some really bad problems with your lungs if this is your cause of death. At older ages, that's more common, but look at the percentage change. It's fairly small. It's less than a 10% decrease, more like 5%. This might actually be kind of in the normal range of changing over a 3-year period. And with a heavy concentration on dealing with people having trouble breathing. So this is not necessarily suspicious one way or the other. So you can see now we're getting into smaller things. We're getting a variety of behaviors from cause of death changes compared to 2019. It's not all excess mortality once you focus on specific causes of death. Okay, flu, pneumonia. Now, this is one that probably I should have pulled back farther, but to remind you, actually, I'm going to go back to this slide. Okay, flu and pneumonia, and actually this is going to be helpful liver disease and kidney disease because I'll be talking about this soon as well. This one is the age-adjusted rate, so we're looking at something entirely different here. This is looking over time, 1999 to 2022. And the secular trend, so the long-term trend, is that flu and pneumonia death rates in general, yes, it fluctuates, it's noisy, you have a bad flu year, good flu year, yada, yada. But in general, over the long term, deaths by flu, age-adjusted, have been improving, improving treatment. It's not that the severity has gotten less, because that's not exactly true from what I can tell. It's that we've gotten better at treating people with the flu, Z-Pak and all of that stuff. So that seems to be what's going on here with flu and pneumonia. But as you can see, it does go up and down quite a bit. There is a lot of noise. Here's a bad flu year before we went into the pandemic. And it did go down and up. There were recorded flu pneumonia deaths pre-COVID, and then there was a shift into recording COVID deaths. Perhaps some of those flu and pneumonia deaths in early 2020, perhaps, I don't know, were actually COVID deaths, but maybe they weren't. Maybe there was a flu pneumonia mix going in there. But as we know, in 2021, it completely, there was no flu. And they know how to test for flu. I got tested for flu when I got tested for COVID. So did my kids. And they didn't find any flu. So, viral interference, I don't know. But there was a bounce back in flu at the end of 2022. Again, they know how to test for flu. I do want to point out, because we will be coming back to this kidney disease going up and then kind of coming down and then really coming up again. We'll see that. And then liver disease kind of being flat and then starting to come up. Okay, so remember those trends because we will be seeing these again. So yeah, this looks really funky. 2020 did have a higher flu pneumonia death rate. And I started it at age 35, again, funky things with kids and young adults, et cetera, et cetera. So I cut it off there. You need to recall the 27 to 2018 seasonal flu season was bad. Then 2018 into 2019, so this is into January 2019, was light. So there weren't a lot. There were less flu pneumonia deaths in the beginning of 2019, but then going into the winter of 2019, most flu pneumonia deaths are at the beginning of the year, in January. It kind of ramps up in December, but it really tends to peak in January and then comes down in February, March. So we had that, but then in 2021, which was our really bad COVID year, we have things come down and then kind of mixed in 2022. So I'm thinking for 2023 compared to 2019, we're going to see 2023 above 2019 again. And this is one of these things that fluctuates. That's just normal. Again, I don't, that flu, it wasn't that it was pneumonia, because pneumonia still occurs. But flu specifically kind of disappeared in 2021, which was an interesting phenomenon. Yeah, that was that was just interesting, and I was asking people about that. And if you go to the CDC flu view, you will see they were testing, and it was abnormally low. It wasn't that they weren't testing for flu. That's not the case. They were absolutely testing for the flu. They know how to test for the flu, and they weren't finding it. So, as I said, one of the things that I had come found around was something called viral interference. So that is potentially an explanation that COVID was crowding out the flu virus circulating at the time, during 2021 specifically, um, which is interesting. I had never heard of that before, but there you go. This one is interesting, and you can see it with your eyes on this graph. But again, now take a look at what the vertical scale is going from 0 to 1,000. This is diabetes. And you can see 2018, 2019, and a noticeable gap between that and the pandemic years. Even at older ages, you can see it with your eyes. There is a visible gap. And yeah, especially down here. So for this one, I started it at age 30 to 34, and there were some large percentage increases for death rates for diabetes on all the ages. But yes, obviously for the lower ages here, 30 to 34, 35 to 39, there are some good and some bad trends here. So the good trends are coming down. This spike here, 35 to 39 years old, this initial spike in 2020, and then coming down. It can be with lockdowns, etc., and panicking perhaps in 2020, and also potentially comorbidities with COVID. That you had untreated diabetes in 2020, and people may have died as a result. But as time has gone on, people are getting the treatment they need for their diabetes. So yay. So that's good. And we're seeing this up to actually age 70 to 74. But yeah, the trend for over age 75 is not good. That said, there could be, just looking at what's going on, there could be other trends going on. Even so, let's take a look at what the level here is. 20% increase is substantial, and the death rate due to diabetes is, pretty substantial itself. It is a top cause of death in the United States. Diabetes was one of the major comorbidities with COVID. Um, so, there's all sorts of dynamics that can be going on here with diabetes. This is likely to be very complex. Uh, this is one of those things that, and of course, there's two major types of diabetes, though, of course, the predominant diabetes is type 2 diabetes, more insufficient regulation with regards to insulin versus the autoimmune disorder, which is type 1 diabetes. Um, so, you know, some Im- not improving. I mean, the thing is, this is still like 10%. I'm like, oh, good trend, but it's still positive in terms of this death rate is higher than 2019, even though it is improving compared to 2020 and 2021. So I'm still kind of expecting excess mortality from diabetes here. This it's not great, but at least it's going in a direction that's hopeful, hoping that the diabetes will get under control. Okay, kidney disease. This is one that is hard to eyeball, unlike with diabetes. So, and lovely that you don't really see a huge amount for people who are young. So this tends to be older people, and I start at age 35 to 39. This has a horrid trend. And from the pandemic specifically, as I said, there had been some improvements in kidney disease before, death trends before the pandemic, and the high level age adjusted death rate trend during the pandemic looked bad. And now that we split it out by age group for 35 and older, this is a horrible trend. It was bad in 2020, got worse in 2021, and got even worse in 2022. And we can see it's getting progressively worse each year. So kidneys are very important to have to filter out, various things in your blood. And um, I have been tracking this. I think I've mentioned before the personal, and in some of my posts and podcasts, my personal connection to the Kidney Foundation that I had volunteered with my Aunt Pat, who I was named after, back in the 1980s when I was a kid. And it was at a Kidney Foundation camp, summer camp for children who had kidney disease. But the thing is with kidney disease, the people who have not had transplants, that they have to do dialysis regularly, like 2-3 times a week. And yes, technology has come farther, that there's in-home dialysis now, but it seems to me a lot of people probably had their treatment disrupted, and this is something that's cumulative and may have gotten worse. And a lot of people just lost their support, perhaps. I mean, this is awful. Um, uh, and the trend, maybe this is something that fell between the cracks, or maybe this is something that got exacerbated by COVID itself. I have a feeling this is something that has a particular geographic footprint too. I know this has a different impact by race and ethnicity, that in particular, Black people tend to have a higher incidence with regards to kidney disease. This has got real high incidence in the Southeast. So I don't know, did something happen that this is not getting taken care of? This is awful. Um, there's just no two ways about this, and I don't know what's being done, if anything, about this trend. Um, it's just not one of those things that gets a lot of focus compared to a lot of other causes of death. So here you go, kidney disease in a very bad trend. Okay, this is the one physiological cause of death that I'm not using a logarithmic scale for. And when you look at the shape of the curve, you can see why. It's not in the same shape as all the others. If I did it as a logarithmic scale, it would make no sense. And you can see, here's the other thing, death by liver disease. This doesn't have 1,000 as its top line. This is 50. So this is at a much lower level compared to all the other causes of death. And of course, liver disease, it's mostly associated with alcohol abuse. And that's just happens to be the case. That's different from the other ones. This is much lower level of rate compared to the other causes, but I wanted to highlight this because there's been a huge increase in death by liver disease during the pandemic. If you see the yellow and green lines here, this is before, and it does have an interesting shape, compared to the other ones. It kind of has this plateau in middle age, and then drops off at older age, maybe because all of the people who were going to die of alcoholic liver disease die well before age 85. But there is a jump up during the pandemic. So let's take a look at that percentage jump. Here we go. And this is, you can see some huge percentage increases at these younger ages. But again, remember that these have a smaller rate that they're increasing from. If we look at where the plateau is, which is here at the older middle-aged group, so it was about a 20% increase for 2021, and some of it's coming down. Again, we're seeing this bad trend with the 75 to 79-year-old group and some of the older ages, but this had some lower rates. So again, there has been an indication of higher, great increase in alcohol use and abuse. Same for drug use and abuse during the pandemic. This comes out in mortality rates. It comes out in motor vehicle accident rates, which I will be covering in future videos. Um, this is pretty bad. So my spreadsheets, these slides, all of the stuff is online. I will be touching on external causes in future videos, which are accidents, homicides, and suicides, which have very different patterns from these as well. Obviously, there are other major causes of death, but now that I've dropped down to liver disease, you can kind of see we're starting to drop into much lower rates for these causes of death. So, once you get down into those levels, it's hard to get the level of detail or analysis because you're starting to get into some very noisy data. Um, but you can see there's a lot of different patterns that have appeared, some which, of course, may go back to normal in terms of trend, but others have some very worrying trends. And, you don't know if it's actually going to get worse just because there had been decades of improvement. Some of these, like liver disease and kidney disease, had been kind of ambiguous in trend before the pandemic, and that kidney disease got worse and liver disease kind of went worse, sideways, etc. They may contribute to worse mortality in the near future and maybe beyond. So these are things worth thinking about. So there will be future videos.